Hi everyone, this is Nick Pollock here from Roar Lions Roar. While you're here, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that alert bell so you never miss any of our new content. And if you prefer to listen instead of watch, make sure you check us out on your podcast platform of choice where you can subscribe and download each new episode. Thanks for watching and thanks for listening. Go State!
Hello everyone, and welcome back to Roar Lions Roar. We are here to kick off our season previews, and to start things off, we are going to start with quarterback. I should probably introduce myself first. Hi everyone, I'm Matt Lipowitz. Good to see everyone. Joining me in the heart of Big Ten country as of today in Seattle, Mr. Nick Pollock. Nick, hello, how are you?
That's right, yeah, heart of Big Ten country, Seattle, Washington. Fascinating. True. I'm doing
used
great.
To be me here in Chicago. I'm glad that we could expand.
Yeah, I'm doing great. I know many fans of Pac-12 teams are justifiably upset right now. But very selfishly, for me personally, this is a great thing. So, good for me.
It feels weird. I don't want to talk too much about it because I feel like realignment has taken up so much of the air out of the preseason. So much of the conversation is about things that I couldn't care less about right now. It is weird. I'm happy that Penn State is in a power player conference. I think that is a very good thing to be. And I'm just curious to see what this sport looks like in even 3 years from now, because it's going to be drastically different than what we're going to see here in about 27 days at time of recording.
Yeah, it's going to be a whole different world.
But Nick, you and I are in for a bit of a different world at the quarterback position for the Penn State Nittany Lions this upcoming fall. Sean Clifford, after 6 years with the program, 4 years as a starter, departs, heads over to the Green Bay Packers, where he's battling currently for the backup job to Jordan Love. And Cliff's best year, Nick, was probably last year. You think that's fair to say?
Yeah, I don't remember offhand if it was statistically his best year, but I think it was pretty clearly his best year when you consider the anecdotal evidence as well.
Yeah, and those statistics, 226 for 351 completion-wise, 2,822 passing yards, 24 touchdowns to go along with 7 interceptions. Also, as usual, a big threat in the run game. Ran for 176 yards, which was third on the Nittany Lions team this past fall, and 5 touchdowns as well. So, Cliff exits. I'm very happy for Sean Clifford, but now it's time for a guy who, at least you and I, Nick, have had the Allar Sean Clifford debate, maybe more on this podcast than anybody else, and that's done. That era is over. We can move ahead as former 5-star sophomore now, Drew Allar, enters the fold for Penn State this upcoming fall. He saw action in a lot of games for a backup quarterback. Ignore the fact that they were clearly trying to make him ready to start next year. Just from a pure, this dude saw action very early in his career. He saw action in that first game of the year against Purdue, where he came in there and threw 4 passes. He saw action the next week in Ohio. He played at Auburn. He played at Michigan. He played in the Rose Bowl. This is a dude who saw action in a lot of big games. And final stat line for him for the year, 35 completions on 60 attempts, 344 yards, and 4 touchdowns. So not too bad, Nick. So let's just dive right in. Drew Allar, what are you hoping for in year 1 as a starter for the Medina, Ohio native?
What am I hoping for?
I guess what are you expecting might be a better way to word this.
I think I'm expecting... I think it's fair to expect something that looks similar to maybe a small step down from what Clifford did last year, numbers, statistic wise, when it comes to passing. Although it really does seem like they are working to make Allar usable in the run game as well. He probably won't have as many rushing yards as Clifford did, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him have 5 or 6 rushing touchdowns.
They'll have certain packages, I think, for him. If you remember, on 4th down a couple of times, they did quarterback power. I mean, Allar's built like Big Ben was. They scored on 4th down with it against Rutgers. They converted a fourth and short against some MAC team. Like, Allar can move, I think, more, but like, to expect those design like quarterback runs like Clifford scored on against Auburn and I think Rutgers, I don't think those
No.
can be in the playbook
And that
with
they don't
Allar
need
under
to be.
center.
And honestly, I think one of the main reasons that,
No.
like, I don't think expecting a repeat of what Clifford necessarily did last year or better than that is, I don't think that's necessary, because the run game should be so good and the offensive line should be so good to support that run game. So it's just not going to be necessary for him to be doing that much. And I think, James Franklin and Mike Yurcich would probably prefer it that way. Like, yeah, he's, he obviously comes with all the hype in the world, but that doesn't mean that you want to put your team's playoff hopes on the shoulders of this first time starter. So I think it's probably a good expectation to look at something around what Clifford did last year, with just maybe a couple steps down from that.
Statistic wise, not like
Yeah,
quality of play wise. Are you
statistic-wise,
talking, or you think it's going to be a
yes.
step down?
I mean,
in,
like quality of play
okay.
wise, like, I mean,
Nick,
there's very different players, so it's hard to even really compare them, honestly.
I would agree. Nick, I have some numbers I want to throw at you. And this isn't my prediction for like what his stat line is going to look like. I just want to get a feel for what you think, if this is realistic or not. Does that sound okay? Okay. So here's a stat line that I'm just going to throw out there. Drew Allar in year one as a starter, 67% completion percentage, 25 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. Unrealistic, realistic? Where do we fall here?
I think that's realistic. I'm not.
Okay.
I have to think a little more, and I'm sure we'll get to something like this when we get to the over-under pod. I have to think more about whether I would want to necessarily like wager money that he hits those lines. But I think, as far as just like a general, like, is this something within the realm of possibility? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so those numbers are 5% better than Sean Clifford's numbers were in those departments last year, is how I came out to that. Quick caveat, Clifford threw 7 picks last year, but 5% of 7 was like negligible, so I left it at 7. If you want to call it 6, fine. That's raising the expectations. But that's what I've been saying, I think, for the past couple months, is that I need Allar to be 5% better than Sean Clifford for this team to live up to my 11-1 expectation. And when you put the numbers in front of us, I didn't put passing yards in here for the reason that I don't think Penn State is going to throw the ball as much this upcoming fall. So just being 5% better in his opportunities is what I'm looking for. And that's where I think completion percentage comes in. I put touchdowns in there just because I think that sometimes in the red zone, they kind of clammed up a little bit. You could say that's just going to be more running room anyway. We can throw that number out too, but that would be 5% better than what we saw in year 6 of Sean Clifford. Would be 6-7% completion, 25 touchdowns, 7 picks. I think somewhere around like the 64% completion, I'll say, 23 touchdowns, and I'll say 9 picks could be realistic. The only thing that I think where those numbers would then be 5% better is if those, turnovers especially are spread out over more games. Like, you can't have the 4 turnover game at home against Ohio State anymore. That just can't happen if you want to win. Like, you cannot have the backbreaking interception against Purdue that then leads to you having to have this Herculean effort in week 1 to go out there and win. Like, I think he can throw more interceptions, but still put together a better body of work depending on when those throws and when those mistakes happen. Because to Clifford's credit, he was very, very good at controlling that offense and commanding that offense, and he looked very comfortable. And I think Allar can live up to that. And I don't want to discount what experience means, but I'm not necessarily of the belief that experience is all that important for a quarterback.
That's an interesting take. Well, before I answer that, I will push back. I don't think that Allar being 5% better than Clifford was last year is like if that doesn't happen, Penn State can't go to the playoff. Like, I don't think that's true, because I think the run game is going to be even more prolific this year, and I think the defense is going to be incredible. But I understand what you're saying.
Right. Maybe I should caveat this. If Penn State makes the playoff, I think Allar is the third most important piece in that. I think number 1's the defense, number 2 is the run game, and then I think Allar is the third part of that.
Now I just said that I totally what was I even disagreeing with you just now? Goodness.
The experience. I've made the
Oh
experience
yeah, yeah.
point, like, just to our friends a lot lately, and, like, again, it comes back to this, like, it, I'm really happy for Sean Clifford. I don't want this to turn into me minimizing what he did. Like, if Sean Clifford's experience in his fifth and sixth year was 2 total touchdowns against Michigan and 6 turnovers in 2 games against Ohio State, like, that experience just wasn't worth much to me. Like, I know it helped them to avoid some dumb losses, but it nearly didn't. Like, especially in that Purdue game. Like, experience definitely is a factor in a quarterback's success, but I don't think that if Penn State drops a game they shouldn't, I don't necessarily think it's going to be because of Allar's
I
inexperience.
don't think that's unfair, but I think you are discounting a bit the effect that a quarterback's experience level has on everybody else around them. Um, because
For
it's
sure.
not that Sean Clifford being at Penn State for 67 years, like it's not that fact alone and not his own ability and like it's not those things like just those things about him that makes the difference. I think it's, think about all the moving parts that Penn State's offensive line has had over the last 3 years. Think about all the moving parts in the run game, like totally new run game this past year. Think about all the different,
Right.
they've cycled through more receivers than probably most schools do because they've, struggled to really put together true consistency in that department. So I think having experience at the quarterback position, maybe not necessarily showing up in terms of like you said, like you used the point of maybe it's not showing up in the form of beating Ohio State or Michigan when you really need to. But I think the point of not losing the dumb games is also one that you glossed over a bit too quickly because I think there were probably a lot of opportunities
Probably,
for
yeah.
things to go wrong, especially last year, offensively, that having Sean Clifford helped cover up. I think Drew Allar's talent level can, cover up for things the same way that Sean Clifford's experience did. But like, I love the example of the Nick Singleton touchdown run against Utah, where they did the fake check with me thing. I don't know that that's something they do
Hmm.
with, a quarterback who's starting his seventh or eighth game because it requires total confidence and coordination and a deep understanding of what's going on with the offense. So I think you glossed over it a bit. I understand what you're saying though.
Mhm. So the thing I want to make sure I hit on is Clifford a lot of the time, like, think back to 2019 where his offensive line was some inexperienced guys, some redshirt freshmen. The wide receiver room was KJ Hamler, and I don't really think anybody else. That would have been Jahan Dotson's sophomore year. So before he really broke out, he had Fryermuth as the security blanket, and then he had some freshman tailbacks. And then 2020 was, again, another round of freshman tailbacks, some inexperienced guys. It was Dotson's kind of breakout. 2021, not all that much experience. And then you drop Allar in here, who I think has a higher ceiling end. The offensive line, at least the projected starters right now, are all going to be at least third year guys in the program or more. I guess Norzad's second year in the program, sixth year of college football. These are old players in the college football world blocking for him up front. His pass catchers, Dante Cephas, fifth year guy, new to the Big Ten, but reliable enough. Keandre Lambert Smith, year 4. Trey Wallace, year 3. The tight ends, Theo Johnson, Tyler Warren, year 4. The running backs, 2 of the most explosive and talented running backs who are now experienced in the country. Like, the players surrounding Allar, I think, are going to help prevent him make mistakes because they're all going to understand their role. And they'll know that from day one, which isn't a luxury I don't really think Cliff
No,
exactly
he didn't.
got. Like, I think this line being one of the better in the Big Ten is going to be huge for Aller. I think the backs taking so much off of his plate are going to be huge. Like, they need people to step up at wide receiver, but they don't need him to go out there and do the Sean Clifford 2021 thing where he has to throw 50 times a game. Like, if Aller throws it, I think, like 19 times a game, under 20, I think that's totally acceptable in a winning formula. And again, that's just a luxury that you want to have for your 5-star quarterback, and not a lot of programs can offer that. And I like that Allar's getting dropped into that situation. Dropped in. He'll be here for 20 months by the time September 2nd rolls around, but he'll be able to enter the starting role in a very
Yes,
advantageous
with the
position, I
caveat
think.
of the lack of a true standout number one receiver being, a fairly notable one. But aside from that, yes, it is about as good of a situation as you could hope to be dropping a first year quarterback into, for sure.
Agreed. Do you think Allar's like the most known commodity first time
So
starter
you
Penn
put
State's had in
yeah,
like a
you put this
decade?
question on the outline, and I'm not totally sure that I agree that he is. I understand why you would have said it. I think he is
Really? Numbers wise, he is.
sure.
He threw more passes than obviously Hack, true freshman, came in. McSorley only really had the bowl game, but we saw him have like competitive live bullets. I'll give you that. Clifford came in, not that many live bullets. Like Allar's already thrown more passes in his 1 year than Tommy
Yes.
Stevens did in his 4. Like that breaks my brain. So that's kind of
Right.
where
And
I
I,
got this
I
question
I've
from.
read your mind perfectly. I understood exactly why you asked this question, and that I knew exactly that was going to be your reasoning why. But for me, when I think back on it, the only reps that Aller took that I would really call like competitive, like some other word I can't think of, type reps would be the start of the second half of the Purdue
Mop
game
up duty or not
and
right.
the Michigan game, where at that point they were already so far behind that
Right.
it didn't really matter anyway. I don't. So for me, like, yeah, I'm glad he had opportunities to get into other games. Like, I'm glad he got extended run against like Indiana, for example. Like that was great for him. But
Mhm.
overall, like I would say that I feel like I know about as far as literally what they did have shown on the football field. I don't feel like I know more about Drew Allar than I did about Trace McSorley, because we saw Trace McSorley play what, 3/4 of
Really?
that bowl game? Yeah, I think even more than
Basically,
that,
yeah.
maybe like 3.5 quarters. Like he was in there most of that game because Hack got hurt fairly early, if I remember correctly. So we got to see like
Yeah.
McSorley like go through and in basically an entire game script against, this is before Georgia was really Georgia, but Georgia always has talent. Like they've always had talent. So we got to see him do it against a lot
Mhm.
of talented football players. We got to see him do it with the full offense for the full stretch of time. I feel like we saw more of McSorley with the ones in that one game than we probably saw with Aller with the ones all year. Now, I think with the, there's always a certain greater level of visibility when you're a guy like Drew Allar as a recruit, right? Like
Mhm.
he's the 5-star kid. His videos are floating around all over the internet. We weren't watching videos of Trace McSorley for when he was being recruited. Like when Franklin brought
No.
him over with him from Vanderbilt as a recruit, like we weren't watching Trace McSorley highlights because he wasn't even the highest rated quarterback in his class. Wasn't Michael O'Connor in that class too? Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
when, like, I think that does partially paint this as in an unfair light, because I don't consider knowing them as recruits, knowing them as starting quarterbacks in college necessarily. So I understand where the question came from, but I don't think I feel comfortable saying that I know more definitively about what Drew Allar is going into his first year as a starter than I did Trace McSorley.
That's that. I guess I didn't put maybe as much stock as you did in that bowl game against Georgia, um, and that's a good point. Like I understand that although Aller has seen live bullets, like how high pressure was it? Like, and I guess you're right. It was very different compared to. I'm gonna say I think I know more about Aller than I do about like McSorley or Cliff or Hack, just by nature of like he came up in the era of social media. We all saw the posts. He's been hyped up for forever. We've seen the current OC call plays with him in the game. Like we've seen the quarterback power enter the playbook. We've seen the fact that they clearly think he can sling it. That Amari Evans deep ball. I think there's one pass attempt in the Rose Bowl was just a 40-yard bomb to see if he can get it. Like I think we have a better idea of what the offense is going to be, but maybe that's not the same thing as being a known commodity. I guess. Huh. You may have changed my mind here on this a bit, Nick. As I'm kind of talking through it, it's interesting. And the good news is we don't have to wait much longer to really see what he is with kickoff just about 26, 27,
Wow.
28 days away, which, Nick, should give you just enough time to order and have your t-shirts, your sweatshirts, your crew necks, your joggers delivered from our friends over at Home Field Apparel. Nick, what do you know about Home Field
so
Apparel?
many things about Home Field Apparel. I know that they work harder than basically any other clothing company out there to, make interesting things. Like, you just don't see stuff like Home Field stuff anywhere else.
They do. Their Banner Week stuff has been really cool, and they are our podcast official sponsor, and we are heading into our second year of our partnership with our friends over at Home Field. They make some of the coolest Penn State apparel out there in the marketplace today. Again, crew necks, t-shirts, hoodies, sweatshirts, joggers. I personally cannot wait. I've already decided I'm going to wear my new Nittany Lions script tee for the bar for the first game of the year, and they had the initial 15-piece Penn State collection and then a new drop of about 13 items just a couple of weeks ago. And our listeners, a new code this year as we head into the fall, it's RLR23 now for 15% off your first order. That's all caps, all one word, RLR23. Again, 15% off your first order, a ton of great Penn State stuff, and some schools, maybe if you're not a Penn State fan, Slippery Rock, Pitt, Rutgers, you name it, they're out there. Thank you to Home Field for sponsoring this podcast. And Nick, who is it said is the favorite
First of all,
player
what
of
a
any
fascinating
given fan base?
trio of schools you just pulled out for that. Slippery Rock, Pitt, and Rutgers.
Sure. Well, Slippery Rock's in PA, and the only two other Big Ten FBS stadiums I've been to have been Pitt and Rutgers.
Maybe it's not as random as I thought. Okay.
So just top of mind.
Sure.
Top of mind. Always thinking about our Big Ten brother and a future American Athletic Conference school. Always happy to do that. Nick, why is the backup quarterback always everybody's favorite player?
Because it's the easiest position in sports to simply dream on what they can be without really ever needing to find out what they actually are. It's very simple.
Were you a Tavares Jackson super fan?
Tavares Jackson was excellent when he spent his year with the Seahawks. So absolutely I was. That dude played 8 weeks of NFL football with a torn pec. You can't buy that kind of toughness. That dude was awesome.
That's true.
He was
That's
also
grit.
the best coin flip caller ever. He did not lose ever. I loved him.
All right. Interesting. All right. Shout out to Tavares Jackson. Nick, Penn State's backup quarterback, at least projected. There are no starters. Still a competition phase. Who's to say? But we project it's going to be Pennsylvania native Beau Pribula. I believe the first Pennsylvania scholarship quarterback since Paul Jones. Wow. Is that correct? I want to say McGloin eventually ended up on scholarship, but as a recruit, it's been a minute since the Commonwealth has had a native son in that quarterback roster on scholarship from the jump. Nick, I think Beau Pribula is a really good football player. And I know we haven't seen him play a game in a Penn State uniform yet. He took a red shirt last year, did not appear in any games. But from the way people talk about this guy, I think if he's needed, Pribula can go in there and play some good football for this team this
I very much agree. I think Beau Pribula is a very good football player. And I think, we said this before, in an alternate timeline, he's preparing to be Penn State starter right now. Like, I don't think that the staff would have any reservations about needing to play him. I think the offense would look a bit.
If Michael Penix is called short 3 years ago, probably Beau's the starter.
That is
right now.
Very possible. That is very possible for sure. But like I don't think the staff would have any reservations with needing to play Beau as the starter. I think the offense would look a bit different because I don't think he doesn't have quite the arm talent that Drew Allar does, and he also is a more proficient runner than Drew Allar is. But he's just a gamer, man. Like I think the comparisons to McSorley are fair in some ways and unfair in others, because I think he's he's as similar in the way that he's, he's a grinder. He's going to like find ways to just make things work and find ways to make plays work. But I think he probably has more natural arm talent than Trace McSorley does. And certainly by the time he graduates, I think he'll be
Oh, no doubt.
Much further ahead of where McSorley was. So I think Penn State is in a great situation. It's a situation that, if depending on how Drew Allar's career goes, like, should they expect Beau Pribula to just stick around until Allar's done? Probably not, but it's possible. But I think the staff is, they're in a great spot with what they've built in that room, because having Beau and Drew continuing to battle, even though I'm sure there's no mysteries here. Like, I'm sure Drew knows he's the starter. I'm sure Beau knows Drew's the starter. Everyone in Lash knows who the starter is. But that doesn't mean that they can't compete and work to make each other better, because, anything can happen.
Yeah. Beau, I mean, listen, the trace comparisons are so easy to have. Like, this is the 3-star that, committed to an old regime, that comes in, doesn't have the best arm talent. Like, you're going to always have the people who are like, well, could he play receiver, blah, blah, blah. Like, Beau is always going to be that gritty kind of player. Like, he's bigger than McSorley. He's 6'2", 206. Like, I think that's bigger than like Tua in the NFL. Like, for him to be as mobile as he is at that size is really impressive. I think he's a really great athlete. And I want to make sure I word this respectfully. The Tommy package was a gadget package. They never brought it out in big games. That was very clearly like just a ploy to make sure they had a new wrinkle to put in against like the Iowas of the world. I don't think Beau is going to be in a Tommy Stevens Lion package role. I think he's going to play something similar, but I think they're going to respect him as a passer a lot more than like throwing to Tommy Stevens in the red zone. What do you think? I mean, Beau's going to have a role. I think you and I both agree on that,
I think there
right?
will be something for him, but I think, to your point, I don't foresee them breaking out like the line package for him, because as you recall, in the wonderful podcast I did with Tommy Stevens, awesome, one of my favorite podcasts I've ever done by far. But the line package was really like, that was brought on by him going to Joe Moorhead and saying like, hey, I want to help this team. I want to be involved somehow. Like, what can I do to help? And that was, partially because of where kind of he was at in his career. And like, he was kind of a point of like, I need to do something. I need to show that I have value. Like, there's no questions about what Beau Pribula's value is here. Like, we know what he is right now. So no, I don't expect to see any sort of line package. I honestly just mostly expect them to try to work him in the way that they worked Drew Allar in last year, like at the end of games. And I think that's the most likely path.
Yeah. And I'm excited to see what he does in that. Like, I'm excited to see how, Yurcich calls the offense. I think it's going to be, he's a better athlete than I think Clifford was. So I wonder if there's just like some of the elements to what he did with Sam Ehlinger back then. Like back when Yurcich was at Texas. Like, I'm curious if those plays come back out with Beau. So I think maybe we don't see, because Clifford got the hook pretty early on in a lot of blowouts. I think maybe a drive or two later is when the hook comes for Allar, just because I think the staff knows how important reps are going to be for him. But to say Pribula can't go out there and, I mean, what did I have it, an hour through 4 last year? I feel comfortable saying Pribula can get to 6 passing touchdowns this fall. He's not going to be in our over-under, podcast we do in a couple weeks, but Nick, if I set the over-under for Pribula on passing touchdowns this fall at 5.5,
I'd put the under on that. Yeah.
Really? Okay. You think because of some rushing, just because there's so many backs and blowouts, just going to hand the ball off
more
a lot?
just because of game script at that point. Like, you're not throwing the ball all that often at that point in the game.
Right. What if we did total touchdowns 5.5?
I guess I'd take the over. I wouldn't feel good about it though. I don't think that they're going
I'm in the
to,
same boat.
Like, it was obviously, and for good reason, a very purposeful effort to get Allar in as many games as possible last year. I don't think they're going into this season
Right.
saying we need to get Beau Pribula as many reps as possible. I think it's a different situation. I think it's going to be much more like a more traditional starter and backup kind of playing time split in that regard. Yeah.
Which is totally fine. Like, that's totally healthy for a college football program. And those are two guys I am very excited to see. And Nick, to round it out, we'll talk about Jackson Smolik, the true freshman in this class, early enrollee, guy who's had a chance to go through a winter in the weight room, probably knows the playbook pretty well, very clearly going to be on the travel roster. Nick, for me, Smolik is break glass in case of emergency kind of guy. He's a clear red shirt. I don't see him getting in any games this fall.
But like we've heard good things. We've heard good reports from him. I know that it sounds like he's probably been better than expected since he got to campus. I think it sounds like he's been stronger and more athletic than expected since he got to campus. But he's someone that we, he's not a world beater, and he wasn't a world beater as a recruit, but he lit the state of Iowa on fire basically as a high school quarterback. Like he dominated. So he's clearly coming with some pedigree in that regard. He knows how to win, knows how to play. So he's not going to play a role this year, but it sounds like he's done enough to show that he's like, he's a part of this room. And it's like, especially where he is in a place where he can get lost in the shuffle really quickly. Just because of the eligibility statuses of both Pribula and Allar. So for him, it's even more important than most to really show what he can do as often as possible in practice. And it sounds so far like he's doing it. So good on him.
Yeah, good scout team guy. Pribula made some good waves running that all of last year. Again, if we see him this year, I will personally be stunned. And some walk-ons in the room. Carson Kieswater, I believe is how you pronounce his last name, and Jack Lambert now on campus. So 5 guys now in that room after the Clifford departure and Christian Veilleur's transfer over to a multi-word offense in Pittsburgh with the Panthers. And Nick, we're going to end our run of shows that we're going to have every day for the next 2 weeks with this one question. And you can take it however you want to take it. It can be statistically, it can be just off vibe. But Nick, the 2023 Penn State quarterbacks, better or worse than the 2022 Penn State quarterbacks when it's all said and done?
Boy,
it's a loaded question.
And I can define it however I want.
Whatever way you want to go.
Man,
you can't do in terms of like business ownership. That's unfair. In a lot of other ways, you could take it however you want.
Man, statistically, oh boy. You know what? I'm going to play the card of the optimist today. I'm going to say better. Okay. I don't think it's going to be a significant difference statistically.
Agreed.
And like I said, it would not at all shock me in the slightest if Allar's numbers this year were statistically less impressive than Sean Clifford's were last year. Where I think they can really kind of set themselves apart this year's group as compared to last year's group is, if Allar can do enough, especially early in the season, to show that his arm is not to be messed with and that he can, put the ball on a platter 35 yards downfield whenever he wants. If he can prove that he can do those things, it's going to be significant as far as opening things up for the run game even further. And it's simply something like Sean Clifford has a lot of arm talent. He really does.
He does. He really does.
But it's just not the same. Like the zip that comes with the throws out of Drew Allar's hand, it's just different. It just is. So if he can threaten offenses just by being who he is, that I think is where we could see kind of the biggest differentiator between this year and last year.
Do you think one more quick question, because you made an interesting point. Do you think like West Virginia and Delaware, and let's say Illinois, do you think they come into the game respecting Drew Allar's arm and his ability to take the top off of defense? Or do you think they're going to play more of a, we will challenge this quarterback to beat us deep and, throwing his players open? Like which way do you fall in that assessment?
I think as those teams, I think you follow the basic script that you would follow for any team in those situations. And I think that you throw as much pressure in his face as you possibly can and say, if you can beat us single coverage over the top, cool, good for you. But we're going to make your life hell to prove that you can. And once he proves that he can, then I think you see teams start to back off a little bit.
Okay. I think it might be the same way, where it's going to take respect to earn respect. Like I was watching the game a couple of days ago, the Michigan-Ohio State game, and the entire plan for Jim Knowles clearly was, I have not seen JJ McCarthy, beat a team on his own, and let's see him do it. And credit to McCarthy, he did it. But like it took to game 12 of that season for him to get there.
Yeah.
So I think that could be a pretty similar thing, and it'd be cool if Allar can play like McCarthy did in that game early on in the year. I think that would be pretty neat.
That'd be great.
Nick, that's all I got for this episode. Any final comments on the quarterback as we shift the focus now to maybe Penn State's best position room and running backs tomorrow?
Yeah, nothing more for me. I'm just excited to see these guys play.
As am I, and we are ever closer to the season. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of Roar Lions Roar. As I said, we're going to be back every day for the next 2 weeks, previewing each of Penn State's positions. Be sure to leave us a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. And if you're on YouTube, hey, be cool in the comments. Thumbs up the video, hit subscribe. We always love talking to you guys down there in the comments on YouTube. And follow us on Twitter over at RLR our blog. Thank you to our friends at Homefield. Again, it's 15% off your first order with promo code RLR23. And for my co-host, Nick Polak, I'm Matt Plebovitz. Take care, everyone, and go State.
Go State.